Let's talk about the presidency for a moment, because obviously your name is being whispered in sentences that have the word president.
Some people are whispering it. I'm shouting it as loud as I possibly can.
Yeah. No better man. The presidency in Ireland is significantly different to the type of presidency held by somebody like Barack Obama. Okay, some insect attacking me there. Explain to me what your understanding of the presidency is and what the president in Ireland can do.
Well, traditionally it was a symbolic role, a ceremonial role, and largely a role for retired politicians, you know. I mean, the ones I remember, I don't quite remember Douglas Hyde, who was the first one, but I certainly remember Sean T. O'Kelly, who was a very diminutive little man, about that height, and almost entirely covered by a top hat. And then there was Mr. De Valera, who was completely the reverse. He was immensely tall, with a very recognizable profile. And my family weren't at all keen on Mr. De Valera. But I came to have a certain respect for him because he used to come to the races in Trinity. And also, he was a very good friend to Trinity because the provost was a mathematician and Dev was a mathematician. So they got on very well. And he favoured Trinity in some ways when there were attacks made upon it. And then along came Mary Robinson. And I entered Trinity on the same day as Mary Robinson. We were elected to Foundation Scholarship on the same day. We were both on the Scholars Committee. We graduated the same day. I was friendly with her. And then she ran for the Senate, and I was on her team the first time she ran for the Senate. And I followed her career. She was my barrister in a series of significant cases, both in Ireland and at the European Court of Human Rights. And we were colleagues for a while in the Senate. And then, best of all, I was one of the 20 signatories to her nomination for the presidency. And Mary really shook it up, but in a very nice way. And she showed how it could be done. She didn't have to go screaming about women's rights all the time. She'd made the point. She was the first woman to occupy the position of first citizen of this state. And so that made a huge breach in the remaining walls of prejudice. And the international press came in. And they couldn't believe this because they had this old-fashioned idea of Ireland, pigs in the parlour and the famine and diddly-eye music and all this sort of stuff, and leprechauns and, you know. And suddenly they were confronted by this highly articulate, brilliant young lawyer who took risks and who was on the forefront of every social change. I mean, if you look at it, women on juries, homosexuality, contraception, divorce, all those things, everywhere there's been an advance in the last 30 years, you'll find Mary Robinson's fingerprints on them somewhere. And that changed it into something that could be vital. Now, you're quite right, Shane, of course, very different to the French presidency or the American. They're not executive presidents. But I remember one phrase of Mary Robinson's. We were talking about something. She said about what she called the margin of appreciation, that little grey area where, without destroying the institution, you can push the boat out a bit, you can push the boundaries out. And she certainly did that. But even she was kind of held back a bit because, remember, the government wouldn't, she was invited to give the Dimbleby lecture, or the Wreath, Dimbleby, I think.
Dimbleby, I think.
Yeah, or the Wreath lecture, a very important one about communications, and the government stopped her. And that was just jealousy. It was really
She was always a controversial figure, though, and even in her time since the presidency, she has been controversial.
Wonderfully. I mean, that's why she didn't get the job as Secretary General of the United Nations. She had both the Americans and the Chinese against her because of what she did going to Israel, and thank God she did. I mean, I supported the state of Israel for many years. I supported its right to exist. I assisted them in getting their first ambassador here because I thought it was important they should hear what the Israeli point of view was. But they have created the most appalling mess of inhumanity and war crimes in Gaza and Palestine. And I had a relationship with an Israeli Jewish man for 30 years. It's come to an end now, but we're still very good friends. And I saw him, he came over to visit me in Cyprus a month ago, just out of jail for helping his Palestinian neighbors assert their human rights in a non-violent way. And I'm very proud of him. He's wonderful. And Mary went there, and she criticized what was happening in terms of human rights, because human rights are important not just for the people who are like you. That's very easy to fight for your own human rights or people who are very close to you. But the real test is that people who are not like you and maybe awkward, they're also human. They also have the right to be treated decently. And Mary was critical, and that alienated the Americans. And then, of course, she received the Dalai Lama, and that drove the Chinese crackers. So she was wonderful. And then she was succeeded by Mary McAleese, who is a slightly different figure, but they've done a lot of work, herself and her husband, Martin, both of whom I also knew quite well in Trinity, in building bridges with the North and so on, a lot of it not actually in the public domain. And I also have to say, I saw Mary McAleese. I was appearing in the theatre in Houston, in Texas. I was doing my Joyce one-man show there for some cultural thing, and I was invited there. Mary McAleese came into town, and she gave a breakfast for hard-boiled Texas businessmen, and she was fantastic, without a note. And she just eyeballed them, and I can tell you they were bloody impressed by her. Can I just tell you one other thing that happened there?
Go on, yeah, go on.
I had been a couple of years previously in Iraq on a delegation that was led by David Andrews, the former foreign minister. And we got to see Tariq Aziz, who was the foreign minister of Iraq. These things are all choreographed. No matter where you go, if it's out of Mongolia, you start off and you say, well, isn't it wonderful the similarities between Ireland and outer Mongolia? You know, everything. And you never interrupt. But David Andrews said something about humanitarian interests, and Tariq Aziz just took the head off and said, what are you talking about, humanitarian issues? We're not some bloody third world country to be patronized by the like of you. This was the cradle of civilization. We had the laws of Hammurabi with this. So anyway, there was a big row. So when it came to my turn, I said, well, Dr. Aziz, I'm not apologizing for raising human rights issues. This is one of the reasons I'm here, because I wanted to look at the effects of the UN sanctions, which I actually opposed, on women and children. And while I'm here, I'm also interested in the impact of your government's policies on its citizens. And he said, like what? And I said, well, how about torture, murder, disappearance, all this kind of stuff? And he said, it's not true. I said, oh, yes, it is. I've spoken to some of the victims. And he said, give me their names. I said, you must be joking. It's not enough you do them in. You want to do in their parents and sisters and brothers. And then he said, that's all rubbish. They're CIA agents and spies. And I absolutely lost it, because I'd met these people who'd been tortured. And I said, how dare you say that? You're a disgrace. You will withdraw that remark immediately before I leave this room. And we had to be hauled off each other. And as we left the room, David Andrews said, out of the corner of his mouth, I sincerely hope Norris will get out of this fucking country after what you said to him. And it was 6 months later that I was in Houston in Texas, and Miriam, my wonderful secretary, used to send me over by fax all my mail, and right in the middle of it was an invitation to Saddam Hussein's 60th birthday party and an offer to fly me to Baghdad free of charge. So I didn't know whether they were very impressed by my moral courage, or whether they were going to stick a poisoned umbrella in my bum like they did to the Bulgarian fellow on the bridge in London. So I said to Miriam, just send a thing back saying, Miss Norris regrets she's unable to dine tonight, like the old song, Miss Otis regrets.